words now chiseled in his monument, quote, "I swear upon the altar of God eternal hostility against any form of tyranny over the mind of man." No little matter there. So soon you will be, perhaps, a professor, university president, the Attorney General of the United States, maybe President of the United States. And you will have your own pressing issues to grapple with. But I promise you that no issue will be better decided with less debate, with indifference from the audience, and with voices not listened to and unheard. There are those who will say that certain speech isn't deserving of protection. They will say that some speech is hurtful, even hateful. They will point to the very speech and beliefs that we abhor as Americans. But the right of free speech does not exist only to protect the ideas upon which most of us agree at a given moment in time. As Justice Brandeis eloquently stated in 1927 in concurrence in Whitney versus California, quote, "If there be time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies, to avert the evil by the process of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence." And let me be clear. Protecting free speech does not mean condoning violence like we saw recently in Charlottesville. Indeed, I call upon universities and all Americans to stand up against those who would silence free expression by violence or other means. But a mature society can tell the difference between violence and unpopular speech, and a truly free society stands up, speaks up for cherished rights precisely when it's most difficult to do so. As Justice Holmes once wrote, quote, "If there is any principle of the Constitution that more imperatively calls for the attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate." For the thought that we hate. And we must do so on our campuses. University officials and faculty must defend free expression boldly and unequivocally. That means presidents, regents, trustees, alumni as well. A national recommitment to free speech on campus is long overdue, and action to ensure First Amendment rights are overdue. Starting today, the Department of Justice will do its part in this work. We will enforce federal law, defend free speech, and protect students' free expression from whatever end of the spectrum it may come. To that end, we're filing a statement of interest in a campus free speech case this week, and we will be filing more, I'm sure, in the weeks to come. This month, we marked the 230th anniversary of our Constitution. What a remarkable document indeed. We have the longest existing Constitution in the world, and it is an extraordinary thing. This month, we also mark the 54th anniversary of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. 4 little girls died that day as they changed into their choir robes because the Klan wanted to silence their voices for civil rights. But their voices were not silenced. Dr. Martin Luther King would call them the martyred heroines of a holy crusade for freedom and human dignity. And I urge you, really, urge you to go back and read that eulogy and consider what it had to say to each of us today. This is the true legacy and power of free speech that has been handed down to you. And you could be sure it made people uncomfortable when Martin Luther King spoke about segregation, particularly in the South. This is the heritage that you have been given and that you must protect. So I'm here today to ask you to be involved, to make your voices heard, to defend the rights of others to do the same. For the last 241 years, we have staked a country on the principle that robust and even contentious debate is how we discover truth and resolve the nation's most intractable problems. Your generation will decide if this experiment in freedom will continue. Nothing less than the future of the Republic depends on it. Thank you all. It's great to be with you. Roll Tide. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for those remarks. As you know, this talk has attracted considerable interest from the student body as well as from my colleagues. And we have some questions that have been submitted to us by the students who are in attendance today. And many of the questions are actually similar. They asked about the same question. And I have to say the most popular question concerned, you may be surprised to hear this, the NFL. So here is one iteration of this question for your comment. Can you comment on the recent debate over NFL player protests? As Attorney General, does it concern you that these players are being condemned by many, including the President, for exercising their constitutional rights to free speech and protest?
Well, the President has free speech rights, too. He sends soldiers out every day to defend this country under the flag of the United States, under the national anthem and the unity that those symbols call on us to adhere to. So I agree that it's a big mistake to protest in that fashion because it weakens the commitment we have to this nation that has provided us this freedom. I would note, of course, that the players aren't subject to any prosecution, but if they take a provocative act, they can expect to be condemned, and the President has the right to condemn them, and I would condemn their actions, not them as a human being. But I don't think that was a good... There are many ways these players, with all the assets that they have, can express their political views other than, in effect, denigrating the symbols of our nation, the nation that's provided our freedom to speak and act.
Well, as a matter of fact, the next student question is a follow-up question on what you just said, so let me read it. If the methods citizens have thus far employed to register objection to policies, practices, and situations are unsuitable and divisive in the administration's eyes, what can citizens do to properly register their opinions?
People have a right to register their opinions, to protest, to criticize in any number of ways. I guess it's up to the owners and the people who create these games and pay for the ball fields to decide what you can do on a ball field. But the freedom of every individual player is paramount under the Constitution. It's protected, and we have to protect it. I think that's it's not a contradiction there.
How much does context matter here? Are those whose viewpoints in the minority in a particular community, such as a college campus, in need of any special protection? Will that be a factor that the DOJ will take into account when setting its policies? Who's in the majority and who's in the minority in the given specific community?
Well, all of us need to understand that people who have minority views should be respected and should be listened to them. But I don't think we really need to apply any special rights to a minority group. I think there's a danger, a greater danger, that a minority group might be denied the right to speak, to express their views, somehow be suppressed. And that should always be guarded against. But fundamentally, the Constitution protects everybody's speech, the majority and the minority. And that's, I think, the great tradition that we have in this country. And I really think we should defend it. And I have felt, and we talked about it with a lot of my staff, some young people right out of college, super talented young people. And there's an unease that things are going on campuses that make them very uncomfortable, that they feel not free or affirmed when they express views that might be contrary to the majority. But I don't think the Constitution says you would treat one group different from another. I think fundamentally everyone has the basic right to express themselves.
We got a speech-related question from students, and that is, it says this: as an advocate of free speech, how do you feel about the use of Senate Rule 19 to limit speech on the Senate floor during confirmation hearings, as was done to Senator Warren when she was criticizing your nomination to be Attorney General?
Well, she certainly had a right to criticize my nomination, and I think she really had the right to read the letter that she was blocked, or at least temporarily blocked from reading. The Senate Rule 19 says you should not, it was passed in 1902 after a fist fight broke out on the floor of the Senate, that you shouldn't personally disparage another senator. So I was both a senator and a nominee. So it was a little bit, so I wasn't on the floor and I didn't even think about it. I would just say that I think in general the Senate is one of the most open debating forums in the history of the world. Robert Byrd said there were two great senates, and one of them is the U.S. Senate. And people feel that, and we should be very cautious before we constrict any member of the Senate from speaking on issues and in a way they choose.
Now, you grew up in Alabama, and you were a college student. So did you have any experience as expressing minority opinions in your college? What college was this again? I introduced you.
Huntington College. A great place.
And did you have any experience being the minority viewpoint in your college campus?
Well, yeah. Huntington was a little Methodist liberal arts college. There were no Republicans about then. Somehow somebody, an English teacher, had prevailed upon me to start reading the National Review, and I'd become somewhat conservative in my thinking. But the establishment was a Wallace machine. It dominated Alabama. So we started our little effort on the first time they'd ever had a Republican club on Huntington College's campus, and my wife was a member too. And so we battled, we campaigned, lost almost every time we campaigned, but and even in law school, not many Republicans in the law school bunch, you can be sure, but the time changed. It's amazing. Now virtually every statewide elected official in Alabama is Republican. But so I have a sense, I have a feel for what it's like to stick in there for what you believe and not kowtow to somebody who's got a different view or majority view and they don't want to hear your view. People have a right to not have their mind dominated by, certainly by the government and nobody else really. You're required, all of us are, to use our best judgment and to seek truth and try to do the right thing. And full debate normally clears the air, helps you make better decisions. That certainly was the idea of the founders. And I believe it's still valid today.
Could you tell us a little more about this initiative that the DOJ is taking that you mentioned in your speech? You're filing a statement of interest in a case. What's this case?
Well, it's a case about a Christian group that was attempting to express themselves in a way that any group promoting any agenda, political or religious, we believe should have been allowed to do, and were improperly, we think, constricted in that right. The Constitution provides, free speech, the right to assembly, the right to petition. It also provides the right to free expression of religion. There's a little additional right there that is important. So we think that this case came up promptly because it's got a deadline and for us to file. We can file a statement of interest without being a party in a case. It's one of the unusual rights that the Department of Justice has, the federal government has, to file a statement, a brief, without being a party in a case. And we think it's appropriate to kind of affirm what the proper parameters of free speech are in this at this college in Georgia.
Well, we know you have to be at another engagement, and we're going to have to let you go. But maybe the last question can be about this particular event. As you know, there are many protesters, both in front of this building and in the hallway outside this hall, including members of our faculty who are protesting. This event is being simulcast in a classroom that's outside this auditorium, so that everybody else can come who couldn't come in here could hear it there. And I'm wondering if you have any message, since these words are going to convey outside this room, any message to the folks outside this room, any message to the professors or students that are protesting, or just folks that couldn't join us here in the auditorium today?
Well, first I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be with you. I know this is a very talented group indeed, or you wouldn't be in this law school. We respect your views, no matter what they are. We will defend your views and the right to express them in appropriate and effective ways. It's certainly the great tradition that this country has founded on. We would call on our universities and administrators and officials to intellectually push back against some of the trends that we're seeing today, by which some people seem to think they have a right to block somebody else's beliefs and the expression of those beliefs. I think it's a fundamental thing. And I think if we teach that, if we teach the very fundamental necessity of that, then fewer people will feel that they can have legitimacy by blocking someone else's speech, particularly on a college campus. My heaven's sakes, college campuses where it should be the most. You're forming your ideas, you're thinking things through. It was such a fabulous time for me, and I changed in a lot of different ways over that period of time, and I'm sure you will. So we celebrate the diversity of opinion. We celebrate your freedom to ask questions, to push back, and to challenge what may be orthodoxy in many different areas. That's part of America's heritage. And I got to tell you, the American heritage of law and public policy and the way we approach it is very unique. And I've traveled the globe. I've been in Afghanistan. We helped them write a constitution. But Professor Barnett, they had no heritage of it. It was written up here, but it didn't. Their lives didn't impact that. So we've been blessed with a heritage that causes us to understand in a more deep way than most people in the world can why freedom is important, why debate is important, why free speech is important. So I would urge you to understand and think about the very uniqueness of this right that we have, to defend it steadfastly against anyone that would dominate somebody in their thought and speech. And I believe we'll be a better and more healthy republic afterwards. So it's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Really appreciate you coming. That was a great speech. Really enjoyed it. I think we're going out this way.
Thank you all.